Good afternoon. So we're Sundays with Poets, and we have Mr. Joel Toledo, one of the more prolific poets in the Philippines. So
And we're gonna interview him. But before all that, before all of those serious talk, we're gonna first interview him by fast talk. Yay! So,
By
so
fast
start
talk.
tayo. Mabilis to ah. So, 1, 2, 3, go. Lights on or lights off?
lights off.
Hot or cold?
Hot.
Day or night?
Night.
Sweet or salty?
Salty.
Favorite figure of speech?
And synesthesia.
Favorite time of the day to write a poem?
2 a.m.
Favorite color?
Reddish brown.
UP or Miriam?
Miriam.
May pera ba sa arts o wala?
Wala.
Apple or Android?
Android.
Favorite shoes?
Right now, Adidas CX 4000 na 40.
Oh my god. Favorite author?
Dean Young, if it were a poet.
Favorite drink?
Don Miguel Beer Light.
Favorite Yossi?
Winston Lights.
Describe yourself in one word.
Sonorous.
One word to describe your poetry.
Weird.
One word to describe Philippine lit.
Complicated.
One word to describe Sir Louie Jon.
Fun.
Okay, that ends our fast talk. So,
Pressure agad.
sorry. So we're gonna start with the first question with Troy.
Alright, so let's move on to could you describe your use of language and expressions and figurative language that you use?
How do you answer that in a layman's way? I guess this is poetry, right? So mostly what I write is poetry. So I would say that it's governed by two things: best words in the best order. And that's not me. That's actually a quote from some poet, Coleridge, in fact, who said, "Good poetry is all about diction and syntax." If you were to just slim it down or funnel it to language. So in terms of figurative language, you don't even have to come up with a metaphor or to always pepper that into your poems. The important thing is just to understand that poetry is not fiction or it's not prose. So you have to stylize it in a way that it connects rhythm, offers cadence. There's so many things I can talk about when it comes to the aesthetics of the words on the page, but essentially best words, diction, best order, syntax.
Right. So, based on your work, you seem to write about many different things, whether they be relationships, youth and death, feelings such as grief, trauma, nature, experiences in different places, culture, particularly Asian culture, and various themes. How do you connect to your general style or the message that you try to present in it?
I'd like to think as we get older, if you continue writing poetry, what will be predominant themes in your early works will necessarily change. So that, I guess, is the reason why there is a variety or a kaleidoscope of themes. But if I were to limit it to a few, I would say that my childhood factors a lot in how I write my poems, because I grew up in a province with no electricity. So if you were to see my first book, Chiaroscuro, it had a lot to do with moving into the city from the darkness of my childhood. So themes of childhood, I guess, themes of home, return, and more lately phenomena, especially that this book, Alang was started and ruins and reconstructions, which had a lot to do with what happened in Manila during the time of Ondoy. So in recent years, it's been a bit more phenomenal and involved. Because I guess all writers begin by writing about the self and what you know, and then you start to be more generous as you get older, or to pursue the craft.
I see. So, now, as a writer who writes literature and poetry in English, what are your views on Philippine literature in English?
Question. I guess it has really evolved since the time of, let's say, Edith Tiempo, one of our national artists. But we're proud to say that the Philippines is the first country to have a National Writers Workshop in English, which is the Dumaguete National Writers Workshop. And in that sense, we're ahead in terms of the poetics and understanding more different approaches from formalism to language poetry. The Philippines has always been one step ahead. But the other countries surrounding us are fast catching up. Of course, mas dictated pa rin ng spoken word sila than formalist or page poetry. To just in a nutshell, I'm just saying it's thriving. Philippine Lit in English is thriving to a fault actually, because nagkakaroon ng mga issues. Let's say we tend to look down on other poets that are more of the recent generation or social media poets like Langley.
So that's why I said earlier in the fast talk about how it's complicated.
It is complicated and we can't help but not be affected by the politics. The tendency talaga is to have little camps. But of course we don't want that. We're just writing. Yes, the important thing is not to be swayed by the politics and just write. First rule in writing is to write anyway.
Very well said, sir. So with this, how do you think can Philippine literature in English be improved further?
I guess, like I said in the previous question, let's try to be a little more generous, I guess, to other writers and be more inclusive. That's I guess the word. Because the tendency is there are writers who look down on beginning writers. It's more support. I guess support system is very important, guys. I guess if you get to workshops, that helps. But at the same time, you don't have to necessarily be a published author in the context of a university to be a poet. So if that were to really evolve, we have to find ways to support indie publications. Everybody can write poetry, and let's support those younger writers who are having their own independent collections. Don't just read, essentially, don't just read the published university press poets.
So bouncing off of that, yeah. What's your opinion on the Langley scandal?
It's a $10 million question. I've always appreciated poetry in a sense that it has its own linguistic, let me say, it has to have a more elevated language. What is poetry if not heightened language? If poetry is just something we can just say run of the mill, then there's no distinction between a horoscope entry and an actual poem. I'm not saying this is necessarily of Langley, but I believe that if we are to really appreciate poetry, we should also read the language, and harness the language, romance the words, because it's not just all about relating, guys. Because we have to, as a motto, particularly in my poetry, I believe that, or in my teaching of poetry, I believe we should learn to read the lines more instead of always just reading between the lines.
Very well said, sir.
So, still clarify, because, so are you saying that vernacular language can be?
I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is there has to be a way to write poetry and maintain that scholarly appeal of the poem without, of course, necessarily sounding as though you are just an academic or just using difficult vocabulary. If you would read my poems, you'd see they're not really complicated too, but there is a certain levity that you have to aspire for when you write poetry. It's not just about yourself. For example, that's a common theme. Let's say among the poems of Rupika or Laglia, this is very personal. But I'd like to think that if they continue writing, they will stop writing about the self and be more other-oriented instead of self-oriented. Again, it's not an issue to write Hugot, for example, but at some point you have to graduate from it because it's not the celebration of the noble amateur. Poetry is about something bigger than that. You have to transcend the self, essentially.
Very good, sir. So, now moving on from that, sir. As a writer who writes literature and poetry in English, how does it feel to connect to a wider audience, especially to international readers aside from the local ones? Building up from the question earlier, especially as an award-winning author of various international awards.
It really widens your world, and it makes you a bit more tolerant of stuff that you think is not poetry when you were younger, especially if you took up a creative writing degree. The tendency you have to concepts of poetry. But again, like I said, if you go out of the country and you encounter a lot of other poets, some are so driven by spoken word, for example, or stage performance poetry, because that's the kind of culture they have. So you can really fault them for that. Now, having said that, it's fun to be able to be given residencies. Like I went to the Iowa Writers Residency for 3 months and encountered all these different writers from different cultures. And while it's competitive, you can't help but not be, if you're the Filipino represent, and then you have to deal with some, and then to perform in front of other people. There is always that competition, but at the same time, I guess the important thing is as a writer, you continue writing.
So, if
Despite the presence of so many competition.
so how would you essentially describe then? I'd like to go back to your experience with the Iowa Writers Residency. So essentially, would you be able to share any unique experience?
Well, if you are in Iowa, the tendency is well, I guess the environment affects you a lot in your poetry. When I went to Iowa, the tendency, I was driven more into writing language poetry. When I say language poetry, it's not so much about concepts, but actual linguistics, because that's a dominant strain in the Iowa workshop. Writers that came there, like from Mark Strand to Louise Click to Jory Graham, they tended to be a little more intent on writing language poetry. So in that big sense, it affected me. Ironically, the people who I was with, those other writers, they were not language poets at all, and it's a variety, a plethora of different writing styles. Some are very politicized, some write about nature. Nonetheless, the dominant feeling when you're in the middle of the United States, shivering in the October cold, is to write language poetry because it's very barren. There's nothing there but corn.
Yeah.
So, like, how would you compare that to your experiences in the local scene
Oh,
of-
interesting. Because here, when they always say this, as a beginning writer in the Philippines, it's a rite of passage to be able to go to the workshop. So, as a younger writer, I had gone to the UP National Writers Workshop in Baguio. There was one in Davao, and the Dumaguete National Writers Workshop. Of course, when you go to those workshops, it's just free vacation for 2 to 3 weeks. So the tendency is not so much to write a poem, but to just frolic under the southern sun, so to speak. But camaraderie-wise, you tend to be more, or at least closer to the co-fellows. They call them fellows, right, if you go to a workshop together. And then up to, as you get older, they usually will be your little writer friends. That actually creates a little sense of faction concept. But in the general sense, it's a healthy literary circle we have in the Philippines, because there are so many people fighting against the so-called mainstream. And I guess if you are to really be a good writer in the Philippines, you must at some point go against the so-called grain.
So, do you believe that for a writer to actually become more successful greater than the mainstream ones, they have to go to a writer's workshop?
Actually, it's the other way around. Those who are in the periphery tend to reject the mainstream. And when you are going to the writer's workshop, a lot of them connect that to the establishment. Because of course, can you imagine 50 years of the Dumaguete workshop is an establishment.
Yeah.
So those who don't go are the ones who are really putting out collections by themselves, on their own. And I guess that's important if you are to really maintain a healthy, challenging, competitive literary community. A younger me would have said, I should have gone to the Dumaguete workshop, otherwise you would not be a writer. Of course not. And as you get older, you'll realize that it's so important to have somebody always challenging the so-called middle.
Okay, so now we ask you, how was your, now we delve in deeper into how you wrote your poems. So essentially, how was your creation process in the writing of your poems?
Do you want me to talk about one particular poem, or how I write, essentially? Okay,
Well-
I can begin with that. I believe that there was a writer, or there is a writer, sorry, I made him dead. Sir Jimmy Abad, who's based in the UP, and as a younger writer, he would always tell me in my classes, or the class, he would tell the class, writing is dreaming on the page. So essentially, I believe that writing is like writing an essay for a midterm. You don't know how it's gonna end, how you really are gonna plan it, but it's gonna work fine at some point. But you always have to begin with that. You don't have to plan a poem the way you would plan a novel with an outline of sorts. So I'd rather think that my impetus for writing poetry is usually just a concept I have in mind, maybe a title, maybe a line that resonates, and I begin writing the poem and dream the poem on the page until such a point, I guess, that you have a so-so draft. And then the more important process of revision and editing then occurs.
So with that in mind, I want to look into one particular poem.
Which poem?
What was the story behind the poem of The Same Old Figurative?
Interesting. The Same Old Figurative is what got me the Bridport Prize, and it's a big deal at that time in 2010, 2009, because I was the first Asian to have won an award that is just in the UK, so it's a big deal. And I remember a lot of local writers treated it as a sort of subversion of defeating the British, so to speak. Right? So it was a big deal for me, and I got a lot of money from that. They just wired the money. I think it's $80,000. It was a big deal at that time. In any case, the beginning place of that poem is simply a writing exercise with a friend of mine who's also from the Ateneo. His name actually is R.K. Kirov. Maybe you're familiar with him. LJ would be familiar with R.K. We would just, when I was a bit younger, usually most of the writer friends I have this little gimmick of going out at night, drinking like crazy, and then while drinking in a public place, suddenly fall silent because we have our pens and notebooks out. And then we just say a word to the other, and that becomes the impetus to write the poem. Let's say you give me one word, give me another word, and your other group mates give me 2 words. I would have to write a poem using those 4 words. So that's fun, right? In a big way, it's a bit challenging, but if you are a bit inebriated and you're doing it a lot when you were younger, that actually is what started that poem, The Same Old Figurative. I cannot say that I had a grand plan or agenda, but one of those nights, scrolling or scribbling down on the page, after a few days, this looks good, and I submitted it to the contest.
So can you read this?
Oh, yes. Hold on. This is. It's a bit dated, and I don't really write like this anymore. The tendency, guys, is as you get older, you tend to not like your earlier work. You tend to always try to reinvent the language you say. So I'm gonna read a poem titled The Same Old Figurative. Actually, aside from this poem being a product of what I said earlier as dreaming on the page, it has a lot to do with typhoons in the late 2000s, particularly on Doi. So it's commenting on that in its own weird tangential way. The Same Old Figurative. Yes, the world is strange, riddled with difficult sciences and random magic. But there are compensations, things we do notice, the high cries and erratic spirals of sparrows, the sky gray and now giving in to the regular rain. Still we insist on meaning, that common consolation that now and then makes for beauty or disaster. Listen, the new figures are simply those of birds, the whole notes of their now flightless bodies snagged on the many scales of the city. And it's just thunder, the usual humming of wires. It is only in its breaking that the rain gives itself away. So come now and assemble with the weather. Notice the water gathered on your cup and extended hands, familiar and wet and meaningless. You are merely being cleansed. Bear instead the scarred heart. Notice how its wild human music makes so much sense. Come, the divining can wait. Let us examine the wreckage.
you for that, arguing. So we'll try to reconstruct that poem. So you talk about that it's about typing. So in particular, in what way did you show that concept in your
I guess the very title of the poem is, well, the same old figurative is trying to just downplay everything instead of playing up the idea of the havoc it created. We have to, as the last line says, examine the wreckage in a very clinical way, because it is, we cannot I don't want to over explain a poem because it's weird to explain your own poem, but essentially it's trying to say that instead of hyping it up, let's just do the work that has to be done to fix, adjust and help people. That was a younger me when I was very concerned with the phenomenon. As I guess as you get older, your poetry will gravitate toward more linguistic, philosophical conceits.
Very well said. Thank you.
Alright, so for the past few minutes, we've been talking about how you write as a poet, but then maybe we wanted to know now how it all started. Like what inspired you to do writing?
Interestingly, my first work is not a poem or a collection of poems. I wasn't into poetry in my undergrad years. I actually have a first book that is fantasy for young adults called Pedro and the Life Force, in the vein of Tolkien. But when I started my master's at the UP, I was influenced much by the demeanor, I guess, of poets and how they seem to always be pensive and cool. But I guess as with everybody who was into poetry, you begin by thinking the poet is cool. But you know, after so many years, most of my books have been all poetry. But if we have to really go back to the origin of why I write, it's, I guess, from high school. I was very much interested in constructing words or lines, and I devoured books like crazy. So I never liked math there, to be fair. That's the one reason why people would usually say they write.
So apart from that, we wanted to know now why English? Apart from all the languages, why?
I guess I found it immediately challenging to use the foreign language to write. I don't really know pero I felt there are a lot of writers who were very good in writing in Filipino at the time when I was beginning my master's, my undergrad. And I was always drawn into speaking and writing in that language. I felt that how do I explain it? I like what the words can, the charge that comes in the English language. Of course, this is not to say that I don't like Filipino. It's just that I started out writing in it, and at some point I realized I cannot go back and try to compete with those who are originally writing in that language. And I found more, I guess, room there to innovate. I know it's a bit of a simplistic answer, but it's essentially that a lot of good writers that are present or are everywhere in Filipino, and I wanted the extra challenge there.
Before we end, may I ask you, sir, to read us one more poem? Would you read us Erosion?
Let me look for the poem. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
This is from the newest book called Setting, and the title of the poem is Erosion. It looks weird on the page, but you can just look it up online. Erosion. When the harbor is soaked and friends who promise to be there despite any change in the weather are not there, well, I'd have to reconsider what will is. Take in more air or deflect air more. Perfect time for building elaborate sandcastles. Said the sea, I'm more private than me. One sunset, 3 polished stones you might want to bring home. A ribbon, still a ribbon because the waves won't cooperate. Less and less windows until light relaxes into a nice glassy surface. The labor is done, but that does not mean things are calm. Encounter, be my priori, destroy my form. That the sonnet was beside the lighthouse is because the word derelict is shapeless. neglect necessary, accessorized by day and inspection. Busted machinery, vandalism. I climb up the stairs, grip tight the railings, thinking too much wind is ruin, is what causes rust. Love the broken, Paul Auster said, for they are nameless. That reverence is full of absent things. I should lose the narrative, capitalize or underline certain letters. Postcard, present, here's to homecoming, my friends. Cheers to resistances.
So thank you very much, Sir Joel.
Thank you as well, guys. It was my pleasure.
You've read, you've read Erosion, and it was really great.
It's hard to read, to just immediately comment on the poem anyway, but hopefully when you process it, you'll like it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you as well.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for the Sundays with Poets. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Tune in again next Sunday.
Yeah.